The motive will determine the quality of the act. That's from the selected writings of Mahatma Gandhi.
Gandhi's understanding of human action and its operations in the world was, I would have to say, remarkable. His emphasis was always on the deep level, the underlying motive. He felt that that underlying motive would express itself no matter what happened in the realm of observable action. And I've noticed recently that almost every saint or sage or somebody that we really look up to as having some kind of spiritual wisdom has believed this, that sometimes you may actually have to use force to stop someone from doing something. But if you do that out of love for that person and not out of fear for your own well-being, you will have a nonviolent effect on that person.
And it's so helpful hearing something like that coming from someone as knowledgeable as Michael Nagler, who's been looking into this for most of his life, that if you look at outcomes, that often we argue about the specific technique, but if we look at the process of enacting change, there's technique, there's methods, and there's principles. And all too often we focus on the specific techniques. Do this thing this way. And that certainly is helpful to know that those techniques exist and that they've been worked out very clearly within the nonviolent action sphere. But we also have to understand the method, the approach to it, and we have to have developed the underlying principles of compassion, internal nonviolence, love, this deeper understanding of how this is going to work. And it really takes a lot of the pressure off, because rather than fiddling around trying to get a technique perfect, instead we can cultivate this deep well, this wellspring of love and compassion and internal freedom. And then the actions that you take naturally stem from that space. And while some can be more skillful than others, certainly the outcome flows from the internal principle that you're following. And so from the Taoist perspective, often we might say something like, if the intention, the underlying cultivation that you have is the root, and then the action is the branch or the stem of the tree, if the root is twisted and dried and damaged, then the fruit that comes out of that tree is not going to be healthy. But if the root is strong and healthy, the branches are well nourished, and then the fruit is sweet and full because of where it's coming from. Even in Buddhism, right understanding, right seeing must come before right action. There's an order to it. We cultivate the inside first. Begin within.
There is a law of nature that a thing can be retained by the same means by which it has been acquired. That's Gandhi from Satyagraha in South Africa.
The context for this remark was the frustration that many Indians who didn't have his faith, as in who does, would come to him and say, why don't we just take up arms and get it over with? But one of Gandhi's deepest held and most important principles for us to deal with and think about is, as he put it, violent revolution will bring violent swaraj. I mean, just look at the United States of America. We celebrate a rather bloody war as the way that we got our independence. And I think we'd have to admit that our independence has not been free from conflict.
Once again, recognizing that violence creates more violence. We see it all of the time. And it's fascinating, actually, if you have the chance to check out my interview with Rivera Sun and many of her books and writings. She's all over the internet. She's fantastically prolific as a nonviolence and peace educator. And one of the wonderful things that she taught me is about how this Revolutionary War and the Civil War, for instance, that happened in the United States, that the violent aspects of it have rebounded through history. They've come down echoing, resonating, creating more problems in the future, but there were lots and lots of peaceful and nonviolent actions that happened during that time. And those were the qualities that healed. Those were the qualities that made society better. The actions that were taken during that time in that spirit and with that intention, those have created a much better society. But these people who took incredibly violent actions, even with the best of intentions, of course, because so many of those people, the young men that were sent out to war, they were just trying to protect their homes and their family. They were doing their best. I do not mean to look down upon their memory. I am simply saying that that kind of action has consequences. It's a non-skillful way of making change. And there was a huge amount of change that happened from skillful means, from peaceful, non-violent actions. And those are still with us as well today, but they're not creating further problems. We see it over and over again. One of the wonderful reasons to study history of nonviolence with people like Michael and Rivera's son is because it opens our eyes to how much of the goodness that is in our lives comes from nonviolent and peaceful activists in the past, and how many echoes of violence we can still see in our regular day-to-day that require healing still.
No one should dogmatize about the capacity of human nature for degradation or exaltation. That's Gandhi, Mahatma, Volume 5.
Yeah, we tend to think of ourselves and our potential in a very limited framework. It's what we've been used to and what people expect of us. But Gandhi had reason to believe, of course, partly from his own experience, that the exaltation part was quite impressive, what a human being could learn to do. And he was also sensitive to the degradation to which people can sink. That much we probably are all aware of. But people often say, when you talk to them about nonviolence, they're going to say one of two things. They'll say it has never worked in history, or they'll say it's simply not human nature. And both those things are completely wrong. Gandhi is addressing the second one here. And again, to repeat, he's talking from his own experience. So very hard to deny it.
Yeah, so often we simply don't have enough of an education about the possibilities of what it means to be human, and the studies that have been done showing that, for instance, violence and degradation and enslavement and these things are not naturally part of human nature. They're things that have come along with the culture and society that we've created. But if you have the chance, for instance, read about the Seville Statement on Violence. And this was a series of in-depth studies done over the course of a long time in many, many fields, proving again and again that violence is not an inherent part of human nature. That is something simply it's a kind of poison pill that's been introduced into our world and our society. It keeps echoing down violence, creating more violence, and there's a way out. And hatred is never extinguished by more hatred. As the Buddha once said, it is only through love that hatred, the flames of hatred, are extinguished.
The reader can have no idea of the restraint I have to exercise from week to week in the choice of topics and my vocabulary. It is a training for me. Gandhi, Young India, July 2nd, 1925.
I've often made the case that Gandhi was communicating in action. But it's also the case that he was extremely fastidious and careful and cautious about how he communicated in language. The result of that is that we have in our office, for example, about 98 volumes of the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi. Anywhere that you pick them up, there's cogency. There's something that he says that really has some helpful meaning. So he recognized that his words would be taken very seriously by millions of people. And his whole struggle to be a nonviolent person occurred partly in that realm, the ability to curb and direct his speech in a nonviolent vein. We have to really appreciate that struggle.
Within media training, for instance, which I've only had a very little of, there's this continued reference to the importance of staying on topic, staying on theme, trying to get your message across. You want to make certain that what you are saying is coherent, that it all moves toward a single goal. And how much more so if your whole life is shaped around that. Rather than dispersing your message as a human, you become centered around peace and compassion, love and kindness, universal friendliness, skillful action, clarity. If this becomes the center of your life, then everything that you talk about and every action that you take makes some move in that direction. And of course, we get better as we go. Gandhi himself got better and better as he went along. He didn't know what he was doing at first either. And yet, recognizing that, in this case, choosing your words. Be careful about the words that you use. Make certain that the point of everything that you're saying is moving toward nonviolent measures. If you have the chance to look up Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication, this is also something that he communicates and talks about. There are certain words that are best to not use because they always generate a feeling of competition or judgment. And if you purge your life of violent impulses, of light cruelty, of all these things that were often part of our youth and we grow up with, it's part of the world, it's part of the water in which we swim, we have to become free of that in order to become part of the movement to create a safer, healthier, purer world, one without violence and hatred and greed and delusion and all of the things that are already poisoning the space around us. We have to become embodiments of that. And in this case, as Gandhi is talking about, even in your speech, let every word bring truth and peace to the space around you.
But I know that I have still before me a difficult path to traverse. I must reduce myself to zero. So long as one does not of his own free will put himself last among his fellow creatures, there is no salvation for him. Gandhi, Autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth.
This is one of Gandhi's acknowledgments that even though he had gone so far by our standards, that he had further to go. His attitude never was one of complacency that would immediately lead to a sense of superiority, whereas he felt always that we were fellow strugglers. He might be on a different place in the struggle that we were, but we're all struggling in this together. That's why I love the guy so much.
Yeah, such a kind-hearted way to see the world. When I was younger, I did a Bodhisattva training and took the Bodhisattva pledge with the Dalai Lama, and it was incredibly meaningful to me. It shaped the direction of my life. It shaped the way that I see interactions in the world. And one of those is the statement that, again, with this coherent life message, everything in my life becomes shaped around how can I be of service? How can I help to heal the world? in a way that is not about me. It's not about me taking, but rather I become so balanced and self-sufficient that my internal state of love is overflowing, so I am nourished and the space around me is nourished. And in this Buddhist way of seeing the world, that even if I am able to become free of this cycle of life and death, rebirth, samsara, that I will be the last one to leave, to transcend. I will wait until every other sentient being is free, to be here to recognize their needs and to be a pillar of support until everyone else has transcended in this Buddhist way of seeing the universe. And then to be the one that goes last, to make sure there's nobody left behind. And the fact that Gandhi sees his own people and the world around him in that same way is very meaningful to me.
I want you also to grow with me. That's from Mahatma, Volume 4.
It's said even of a political figure, I believe it was Eugene V. Debs, who said, I do not want to rise out of the working class, I want to rise with the working class. That is real heroism, that is real self-sacrifice, and that is real courage. And we see it very seldom. We often see people who have been great leaders, they've led an important movement, and then it goes to their head, and before you know it, they have become what they were rebelling against. So this is Gandhi's way of preventing that from happening.
That sense again that we all rise together. That it's not just all for one, it's all of us or none. And because I am a part of the big picture, and the big picture is a part of me, we must see ourselves on the same team. We're part of the same family, as Gandhi would say. And as I heal, that makes the space better for everybody, so we can all heal. And I want to then extend that opportunity to other people. I can't force transformation of change, of course, of anybody else, and I wouldn't want to, but I do want to create a safe space where it's easier for them to change and to heal, to extend methods that we're learning, because there are so many methods available, methods and techniques available in order to grow and to heal in this important internal way that Gandhi's talking about. And this is one thing that we can do together.
Experience has taught me that it is a mistake hastily to imagine that anything we cannot understand is necessarily wrong. That's from Gandhi's dialogue with Christianity.
I see two important principles in this short comment of his. First of all, that what he learned from experience, not primarily from reading it in books and thinking about it as a theory. And secondly, that in fact we have this failing, this shortcoming, we see it all the time, where people don't understand something. For example, nonviolence, because it's new to them. And because they don't understand it, they dismiss it. And that, I think you'd have to call that a kind of arrogance, that I understand everything. Of course we don't. And when we don't understand something, the correct response, as Gandhi's pointing out, is to try to understand it. It might even be going to somebody who understands it for help.
Super important to step out of our own philosophical and ideological bubbles when we can, especially since we're in a world that, for instance, with technology and algorithms that sort us into piles of people. You belong over in this line, you belong in this group over here, everybody agrees with you. You have to travel quite a ways in order to find somebody that doesn't hold exactly the same set of beliefs that you do, therefore everybody else is wrong. And there's a fascinating thing about humans I've noticed, which is the way people often judge whether or not something is true isn't based on its tendency to comport and resonate with reality around them, but how strongly they feel about it. And it's a very fascinating thing to observe that if I feel emotionally strongly about an idea, the more true it seems. And if I dislike an idea, it feels untrue. Whether or not it works within reality around me, whether or not I can see the impact of it or not, if I dislike it, it feels untrue. If I really like it, it feels very true. And the stronger that emotional connection, the more true it becomes. And this is a really poor way of judging what is true and false in the world. And sometimes it's worthwhile reaching out to an expert. Maybe I should say it's always worth reaching out to an expert to learn and educate and to grow and use means other than our emotional attachment or resistance to an idea in order to judge its truth or falsity.
In concrete terms, the independence should be political, economic, and moral. That's from Gandhi's dialogue with Christianity.
We have seen many revolutions, many uprisings, many efforts at regime change before, during, and after Gandhi's work in India, and many of them failed for this very reason, that they strove for political liberation without taking into account the deeper dimensions of human experience. And what Gandhi found is that if you take care of those deeper dimensions, the political dimension is relatively easy to adjust.
And this again gets back to what Michael was talking about with intersectionality, that everything relates to everything else. That you can't make just economic change without shifting politics and societal values and the way people work and this kind of thing. You can't shift morals without having it adjust everything else around you. There's nothing that doesn't relate and connect to everything else. So for instance, as we're dealing with environmental justice ties deeply in with economic injustice, and we have to look into every feature of the world around us and see in what way that area can be healed. Because at some point, all of them have to be addressed. Not necessarily one at a time, but as best we can. There's plenty of us. If there's a particular bubble that you intersect with, a particular space that needs healing, whether small or grand, do your best to first heal yourself, and then from that space on the inside, express that wholeness within that sphere around you. And a bit by bit, it makes a change in the whole world because everything touches that sphere. Everything is related to everything else. When we see that within people, that becomes love. And when we see that in the rest of the world, that is a source of wisdom.
Means and ends are convertible terms in my philosophy of life. Gandhi, Young India, December 26, 1924.
This is a very deep philosophical principle. We've seen him talking about it before, and its main application in terms of the freedom struggle was to point out that, hotheads who wanted to take up arms against the British, and it's perfectly understandable. He was trying to tell them that if you take up arms against them, we'll have a violent regime on our hands. We'll have a violent country. The only way to do it is to change ourselves from within, let that change do its work, and apply the pressure necessary to make sure that we get compliance from the opponent. But because we haven't roused violence within us to do this, we will not have to deal with a violent situation at the end.
been so helpful. As a chef, I often convert things into recipes, plans for cooking a meal. And the ingredients that we use in that meal are part of, or maybe the exact same as what we end up with, a blend of those ingredients. And if we include violence, if we include pain and suffering and degradation and all of the things that we don't really want in our life, filled with unsafe spaces and people treated as lesser, then we get some version of that in the end. And so recognizing that the means are the end, that the way that we do something is what we get at the end. You cannot bomb the world into peace. You cannot force somebody into being your companion. When you want cooperation, you have to allow it. All of these things are important skills and recognitions about how we go about achieving the world that we want. Remember that if you're going to bake a cake, use the appropriate ingredients and you'll end up in a much more delicious space toward the end.
It is no easy task to restrain the fury of a people incensed by a deep sense of wrong. Gandhi, Young India, May 5th, 1920.
People find it relatively easy to appreciate the degree of power that Gandhi exercised by getting the greatest empire the world had ever seen to not only leave his country, but that basically in so doing, write the end of the story of colonialism by Western powers. But they don't realize how hard he had to work to contain, to restrain, to redirect the fury of people who had been held down for 200 years. You see that in some of the conversations he had in London with revolutionists, and you recognize that he had a harder job there. In fact, at one point he said, here's a graduated series of difficulty, if you will. That's not his exact words. He said, I have 3 opponents, each one harder than the next. The British, the Indian public, and Mahatma Gandhi.
That's really fun. And gosh, it is such a difficult thing, for instance, for us to say that I get to choose when somebody else fights for their freedom. And so often in the culture that I'm from, we will have people being oppressed, being in danger. Their families are in danger. Their economic opportunities are limited to completely impossible, and terrible things are happening. And then the part of the public that is comfortable and safe looks over and says, please don't rock the boat too much. Please don't yell too loud. Please don't stop traffic. And Martin Luther King Jr. actually made a statement that it's very difficult for us, for other people to decide when it is right for you to resist as strongly as you can. If someone's trying to kill you, it's difficult for somebody else to say, hey, calm down a little bit. And so I feel like these struggles are real, and the complexity of understanding skillful means, the right time to apply increasing amounts of pressure. There's a wonderful graph that you can see over at the Metta Center for Nonviolence, where there's an increasing amount of resistance that we apply depending on the increasing amount of danger that we're in, or the need of the people who are taking part. But the important thing in all of that is that strong action is sometimes required, even very intense action. But fury is something that, at least the way it's being presented here, it leads to bad ends for everybody. It's damaging for the people who are experiencing it, and it inherently leads to actions of great violence and damage to the space around it and to the people that they're fighting against. Rather, that same energy, the same Qi, we can say that's channeled through a different space rather than being resisted and exploded inside, rather than it consuming and damaging the person who's experiencing it. There's a kind of righteous fury. There's a kind of heroic energy. In Chinese medicine, we would talk about it as like heroic qi, where it's the same amount of rushing energy, enough to break through a wall and save people. But the space that it comes from in you, it doesn't leave you damaged, and you don't lose your dignity. You don't disconnect with your own values and sense of self. You don't become a raging beast. You just become somebody who is willing to channel all of your energy into this moment of great need. And that is a profound difference.
I hold that, as the largest part of our time is devoted to labor for earning our bread, our children must, from their infancy, be taught the dignity of such labor. Gandhi, Young India, September 1st, 1921.
Yes, since the vast majority of us, at least in that day and age, before artificial intelligence, were involved in actual labor, to deprive that labor of dignity, which is something that happened in a capitalist society, meant disestablishing the legitimate position in society of the vast majority of people. And besides, there's a deeper issue here, and that is that since times immemorial, it's been recognized by great sages that human beings have to work. We have to work off our karma. In our own time, E.F. Schumacher wrote about that beautifully. He said, we have to work to, get food on the table, of course, but we also have to work to fulfill our obligation to our fellow human beings and to work off the angles and corners of our ego. That was one of the reasons that Schumacher liked Gandhi so much, because Gandhi rescued the dignity of labor, and hence the dignity of many, many people, from the kind of snobbishness that capitalism had introduced.
And there is a very well-known researcher that, when looking into the causes and history, the background of violence on the individual and the societal level, he said there is no case of violence that does not result from somebody trying to recover their dignity. Think about that. That this is a foundational aspect of human nature. It's a need to maintain dignity. And then when that dignity is violated, oftentimes all we know is a violent response. And if we recognize that, then allowing people at every part of human society to have equal dignity, rather than holding up one job as more important, one person as more important, one position as more important than another. As in the United States here, we discovered in New York, when sanitation workers, when garbage men, as they were called, when the sanitation workers decided they wanted to raise, they just stopped picking up trash. And New York found very fast how necessary of a job it was that they had. Within 7 days, they gave them everything they asked for, because that is a very important job. And even during COVID here in the United States, we had some ideas about necessary workers, people who had very important jobs, and we discovered just how many people had those very important jobs, because when they didn't go to work, society ceased to function, which means that everybody is incredibly important. How are we going to say that that parent that stays home with their child is not incredibly important? And this goes for everybody. The dignity of work is something that allows us to feel whole. As a part of society, we contribute. It's a natural human thing to want to work and to involve ourselves in the world and share our art and our sweat with the space around us. And when we give grace to every kind of work. That means every kind of work gets done. And again, when people have a sense of dignity, there's a lot less of a reason for violence.
The foundation that Macaulay laid of education has enslaved us. Gandhi, Hind Swaraj.
There's an interesting contrast between this statement of his and the one we just commented on, because there he was talking about the dignity of labor, and here he's talking about the enslavement caused by a kind of labor. And of course, there were two differences. What Macaulay did was train people to be clerks for the smooth administration of the empire. And so it was not manual labor. It wasted the potentials of the human being. And of course, it was slavery. They were doing it for a system that they deplored. This is the exact opposite of the dignity that Gandhi was just speaking about.
This ability for all parts of our life to be able to uphold our highest principles and values is very important for us. And so within Buddhism, there's an eightfold path. There are things that are required for us to live a life that feels wholesome and healthy for us, that makes it that much easier to be awake and to see things as they are, because we're not in conflict with ourselves. One of them is right livelihood. And this is a kind of commitment to ethical business practice, which is to say that you're not cheating, deceiving, being dishonest, or behaving in harmful and violent ways through your job, through your way of feeding yourself. Because that's a kind of entrapment, enslavement. You're stuck. In order to eat, you have to harm people. And so we avoid that kind of work, obviously. Hopefully we're avoiding creating those kinds of jobs. And at the same time, we're avoiding taking part in them in any way. And ideally, you wouldn't give money to people that are forced into that position or that are forcing other people into that position. And so recognizing that human dignity of labor is not the same thing as valuing labor that is harmful and violent by its very nature.
My faith in human nature is irrepressible, and even under the circumstances of a most adverse character. Gandhi, Young India, January 1st, 1920.
I would say that there can be no nonviolence without some degree of that kind of faith. Now, Gandhi's faith was irrepressible because he actually had peered into the depths of human nature, namely in his own heart and soul. And you very quickly reach a point when you do that where you know that you're not just seeing your individual self, but you're seeing the energy, the consciousness, the love and beauty that exists in everyone. So he had seen that firsthand. Whatever happened in the outside world could not negate that vision once you had seen it. So what this does is creates a strong tension between the, well, let me use the word misery that we see around us in the outside world and the incredible potential that realizing the true nature of a human being could bring us to. We could say a lot more about this, but I have a feeling it's going to come up in various forms again and again.
It certainly does come up a lot in Gandhi's writings. And from the Taoist perspective and from my own personal experience, I would like to echo and reinforce this statement that the idea from my culture that I grew up in, that humans are born bad and they need to be corralled and fenced in, and we all need to protect each other from each other's barbaric internal nature, is something that I do not agree with and I do not believe in. And I believe that we have damage from the violence that we've experienced that needs to be healed. But from my own experience, from looking within, and that of my teachers and the sages that I study, a fully healed human, one that is well and balanced, is a human that is loving and compassionate and connected, caring, wise. These are qualities that are inherent to our nature. And it doesn't matter what kind of bad circumstances we are in, a healed, balanced, healthy person is one that is incapable of violence. And I hold that as a statement of truth when practicing medicine, that part of what happens as we heal is we become more quiet inside, we become safer to be around. And so I, for one, agree with Gandhi and Michael Nagler that if we can aim toward health and balance of humanity, to restoring our deeper qualities, that is the direction we all want to go.
The best way to show how to do it is to do it myself. Gandhi, Young India, October 23rd, 1924.
Gandhi was sort of famous for this, and again, it puts him in the exact opposite camp and the exact opposite worldview from most military leaders who, from times immemorial, and Clausewitz actually describes this very well, that you send in other people to risk their life, and you try not to have to do that yourself. So it's, again, an interesting way in which nonviolence is the opposite of violence. And of course, part of this also is his belief that all human beings are identical at their core. At the core of our being resides the same reality. So he should be able to do anything of significance that another person would be called upon to do. Underneath all of this, if I haven't made it completely clear, is this idea of unity. We have so much disunity in our society because of the stratification of work. You know, people who wouldn't dirty their hands, who wouldn't want to get grease on their fingers, end up feeling superior to people who do those kinds of things. So if you wanted to not feel superior to anyone, Gandhi couldn't live with that feeling of superiority or inferiority. You had to get involved in their work. It was as simple as that, and as difficult for us to carry out.
Yeah, gosh. Such a wonderful example of leading from the front. Leaders who are able to be the example. They are the model that we all follow in order to recognize how we want to be in the world. So from the Taoist perspective, we would say that we're following in the footsteps of the sages, the footsteps that were left behind. And by recognizing that there are people who have obtained a fruit and flower that we want for ourselves, that we want to fruit and flower, that we want to blossom ourselves into, we can recognize the pathway that they took and then take those steps ourselves. And sometimes those are in grand ways leading toward awakening and sagehood. And sometimes it's in small ways. You follow someone, you learn how to clean a window better because you watch them clean it. And then you model their behavior, their actions, and you become better at cleaning the window. So from these very small examples to the largest examples, sometimes being a leader means being the one that shows how it's done.
can be born untouchable, as all are sparks of one and the same fire. Gandhi from Yuravda Mandir.
My favorite Greek philosopher, Heraclitus of Ephesus, claimed that the supreme reality that he talked about and obviously had some experience of was what he called aezoon pur, which literally means ever-living fire. The consciousness within us is the same as the energy within us that drives our living systems and our higher awareness as human beings. And once again, its main characteristic is, though on the surface we may have different predilections and respond very differently to things and people that other fellow humans do, that should not blind us to the much more important fact of our overwhelming, overbearing unity of our underlying consciousness. Consciousness is one. That was the fundamental discovery of the Vedanta system that Gandhi comes from. The famous underlying mantra of the Vedantic system for thousands of years was Ekam Sat Bahuda Vipra Vedanti, meaning the truth is one. Wise have called it by various names.
Mm-hmm. And in the Tao Te Ching, the very first chapter is Dao Ke Dao Fei Chang Dao, Ming Ke Ming Fei Chang Ming, which is the Tao that can be Taoed, walked, explored, is not the constant Tao, the unchanging Tao. The Tao that can be named is not the constant name, which is to say that it is something that is beyond names, that is beyond action. It's beyond something that you can know and put into a book. That's why Lao Tzu begins with that phrase, because it's important to recognize that this is not something you can take and put into your pocket, but it is a truth that can be experienced. It's not a thing that you can know, but it is a thing that you can be. And of course, that doesn't make sense until you experience it. But recognizing that nobody is lesser. That's what untouchable here means, because the untouchables were one of the caste systems in India, such a terrible space for someone to be born. And that religious system pervaded the belief that people were born poor or sick or in bad circumstances because they deserved it, because they were bad people in their last life. And people were born wealthy and into better circumstances because they were better people, which is an idea that led to horrifying circumstances for millions of people. And it's really common in the world that I see around me now. The gospel of prosperity. That you're rich because God likes you better. And this is the kind of idea that causes so much suffering in the world. So rather than looking at each other and seeing who has more and who has less and judging people and deciding who's better than the other, who's more deserving of the other, we look at each other and we see that we're all sparks from the same fire. We're all movements of the same ocean. That as humans and sentient beings, we're all one family. No one deserving of more or less. We are all deserving of dignity, equal love and compassion, and a space in this world.
Nonviolence is the greatest force at the disposal of humankind. Gandhi from July 20th, 1931.
Gandhi is actually plagiarizing the Metta Center here because that mantra is our motto, and it was the bedrock of Gandhi's vision and his belief and his faith that to the degree that you actually implemented nonviolence, first and foremost in your mind and heart, and secondly in your speeches and actions, to that extent, your efforts would inevitably succeed. As he says on another occasion, to the extent that you're being nonviolent, failure is out of the question. Success is guaranteed. So that's why sometimes a small group of people and a relatively disenfranchised group of people can prevail over more superficially powerful forces because they are actually engaging some degree of that invincible force, which really has no second. There is no other force in the world but the force of love and nonviolence. And once you've discovered that, you cannot be defeated.
And I like the example that Gandhi uses in another time, comparing it to gravity, the law of gravity. That by working with the laws of nature, the laws of reality, things work. When you try to fight against the laws of reality, they don't work very well. In Taoist terms, we would say this is going against the flow of the Tao or with the flow of the Tao. If I let go of a ball and I expect it to float up and instead it lands on my foot, that is non-skillful action. This is a misunderstanding of the way that the world works, unless I'm holding a helium balloon. If I'm expecting something that is not a part of the natural world, like, for instance, that if I'm violent to somebody, that peace and understanding and safety are going to result from that, that is a clear misunderstanding about the nature of the world and how things work. And so by simply engaging with the way of the world, the shape of the world, by flowing with the movement of the river of the Tao, for instance, by not trying to fight upstream, rather, but moving with it, our actions actually have potency. They actually last. It's well known that tyrants and corrupt business practices, they end up destroying themselves. They may seem to win in the short term, but they destroy the community. They destroy the economic system within which they're trying to live. Usually the people that are at the top, they can't trust each other because they're not trustworthy people. And so they end up betraying each other and destroying their relationships. And we see it all the time. And these people live very unhappy lives because they're surrounded by a kind of tyranny in their own existence, a kind of imbalance, a kind of poison. They're soaking in that and they're spreading that to the space around them. So of course it destroys itself. That venture cannot last because it's inherently self-destructive. But as we create systems that feed, that nurture and grow, if I pour water at the base of a plant versus poison, one will cause the plant to grow, one won't. And all we're doing is following the laws of nature in that context. We recognize that nourishing life, that supporting the community, that helping each other grow, that giving hands up, make things work better. It's just a fact of nature. And then it lasts because those people are now better off and they help other people and it spreads. So rather than a system that destroys itself, it's a system that reinforces and grows. That's why we can have hope for the future, that all of our efforts are taking part in this wave of movement that will last and continue to grow and hopefully will save us all.
It must be taken for granted that when civil disobedience is started, my arrest is a certainty. It is therefore necessary to consider what should be done when the event takes place. Gandhi, Young India, February 27, 1930.
This is the classic attitude of the civil resistor, that he or she not only doesn't try to avoid arrest, but actually seeks arrest to show up to make visible the injustice of the system. You can't do that really on any deep psychological, really convincing way without taking some of its abuse onto yourself. When he said that my arrest is inevitable, he meant that the success of our movement is inevitable. Things will be going as planned. And of course, this was also an extremely strategic move for him to make that statement on two levels. One, it would help to prevent people flying into a rage and doing something violent when he was arrested, as they otherwise would definitely have been inclined to do. And secondly, it enabled them to plan in advance, which is so often missing in modern movements that adopt some version of civil disobedience. So he had planned the devolution of leadership down to the actual individual. So when Gandhi was arrested, his, quote, lieutenants took over when they were arrested. People who had been trained in the ashram took over when they were arrested. Everybody was his own leader. So once again, we see that a nonviolent campaign is actually a preparation for and a rehearsal of the nonviolent regime that we are hoping to install.
And again, a good reminder that nonviolent action, that peaceful resistance as activists, is a skill to be developed. It is a plan to be carried out. It is not just some internal process that is cultivated, although it certainly should come from that. But again, with techniques and methods and principles, the methods that we follow and the techniques that we lay out, the plan that we're following, this is a real thing. We require a teamwork, and we require community to work together. That requires planning and communication skills. And Gandhi spent decades by this point for the Salt March, preparing clearly, not just himself, not just writing down plans and schedules, but preparing the people around him so that they can take up the banner of nonviolent resistance, of loving their neighbors, and move forward. And I find that so very inspiring, that this isn't a haphazard whim that we're following, but we're following a path laid down by the people who came before, a road toward a better world. It may feel like it stretches long, but as Martin Luther King Jr. said, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.